So, welcome to Corny and Barrow's podcast on Domaine du Pélican in Jura. Now, this is a new relationship for CMB, and it's something that we are very excited about. I say new, we have been working with the wines in Asia for some years. We've represented Domaine du Pélican since the 2015 vintage, exclusively in Singapore and Hong Kong. But now we are absolutely delighted to be representing the wines exclusively also in the UK. The man behind Domaine du Pélican is Guillaume d'Angeville, who will be familiar to many CMB customers as the head of the eponymous domain Marquis d'Angeville in Volnay in Burgundy. The Angeville estate goes back years and years, and Guillaume took over in 2003 from his father Jacques. Guillaume was previously a banker in Paris and came back to head up the family estate in Burgundy. He then, with his regisseur, François Duvivier, who has really been Guillaume's right-hand man for many years, decided to start this new adventure in Jura, which geographically lies to the east of Burgundy, really on the way to Switzerland. So you drive due east from Dijon, for example, or from Beaune, and the landscape starts to look increasingly Swiss. And this is where this wine region nestles. And I mean, it's been producing high quality wines really since the Middle Ages. But in terms of international repute, it is a region that has only recently come to the attention of wine lovers and wine collectors worldwide. Guillaume established the estate along with Francois in 2012, and since then they have added a few wines to the lineup. But we'll get into the details of it in due course. I'm joined here today. I should have introduced myself at the beginning. Guy Seddon. I head up the fine wine buying team at Corny and Barrow. I'm joined here by Will Hargrove.
Hello.
Who is our head of fine wine, and by James Franklin.
Good afternoon.
Who is the head of merchanting wine. So we were the three CMB bods who ended up drawing the lucky straws to go and visit Guillaume at Domaine du Pélican very recently, along with our MD, Adam Brett-Smith. I wonder if I just hand over to Will to give my voice a rest and give you a rest from my voice, just so that Will can maybe say a little bit about the trip and how it came about and how it unfolded.
Yeah, I mean, thanks, Guy. It was brilliant. I mean, I think actually all four of us, actually no, Adam had, but the other three of us hadn't been to Jura before. So literally to set off, as you say, east of Burgundy, about an hour and a quarter or so to give people some context. And the landscape really changes as you go, but sort of once you go past about halfway, it was incredibly green. Although having said that, this is sort of early 2024. Obviously, it has been incredibly wet, winter 23 into 24 for all of Europe. So we probably got to see it at its lushest. But yeah, we did a sort of day out and back from Burgundy. And it was brilliant to see the estate. I mean, as I said, never been to Jura, didn't really have any preconceptions. I knew the wines a little bit, as Guy mentioned. I do a little bit of work with our Asia office, and so I was always delighted to taste them out in Hong Kong or Singapore with Thibaut Mathieu, who's a bit of an in-house evangelist for the wines. And it was fascinating. And I think we literally went, as is always good, we got to do a little bit sort of around the vineyard, seeing the winery, which I have to say in itself is a sort of stealth operation. You can barely see it, such as it sort of melts into the scenery, which is a good thing. It's done without using any air conditioning, by basically having a good control of a good sort of insulation and a good control of airflow through the whole setup. And I think one of the rooms that was sort of most intriguing was the Vin Jaune cellar, which we'll come on to, and is also particularly well timed with us, starting to work from this year with Guillaume for the UK, because that's going to see the release of the 2016 Vin Jaune, which will be their will be their first vin jaune. So that was interesting, and really good. We went into Arbois afterwards for a little bit of lunch. The tasting itself we did just before lunch, which is always a better thing than afterwards. We actually started, as you often would do in Burgundy, with reds, going through the sparkling and then into the Sauvignon, which either did or didn't see some floor, and either did or didn't come from single vineyards. So it was really interesting to see. And I think, as I'm sure we'll discuss a bit further, Guillaume stylistically wants to be very true to Jura, but he also wants to be very accurate in his winemaking. Not to say that Jura hasn't been, but I think he wants to do the sort of slightly have the best of both worlds in a way, but certainly does not want to make Burgundian wines in Jura, because otherwise he would have stayed an hour and a quarter to the west and done that. But it was fascinating, sort of three hours at the estate and really getting a chance to taste with Mathieu as well, who's been there a year working closely with Guillaume. So yeah. A really, really good trip and some decent photos that hopefully some of which might make it into the offer guide.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Will. That's great. James, do you want to give a few impressions about maybe the region or the wines themselves?
Yeah, for me, it's been a lifelong ambition to head to the Jura. We've heard a lot in recent years from a lot of the sort of esteemed sommeliers across London. There's been a lot of interest in the wine, so actually to get there firsthand was I'd say it was a lifetime ambition. For me, actually seeing the vineyards of any producer says a lot about the wines. Maybe it's the sort of farming element of me coming out, but I know the first thing we sort of were drawn to when we arrived was a tractor in the vineyard, and were taken by the clay on the tires, which in itself was a very good indication of the terroir that we were looking at. And Adam and I were standing in the vines, and Adam said, "Listen to that." And I said, "What?" And I said, "Oh, the birds." And his comment was, "It's always good when you're in the vineyard and you can hear the birds," reflective of the biodiversity within the vineyards. And it sounds a strange thing to say, but looking at the vines, you could see the vitality, you could see the healthiness, you could see, I guess, the excitement about the wines that we were going to taste. And as Will mentioned, the winery itself is quite a feat of architecture, and to have the wines naturally kept at a regular temperature by a water system that flows in under the vineyard is quite pioneering. So you can see the detail that's gone into the planning of the entire operation. And I think that's very evident in the quality of the wines that we were then very fortunate to taste.
Yeah, and I mean, I'll pick up on your mention of both the birds and the clay. I mean, the bird thing I totally agree with, and I mean that really feels like a rural region. I think sort of driving away from, relatively speaking, a sort of glitzy Côte d'Or, I guess you would say, and really getting into the sort of deep countryside of eastern France. I think it really does feel like you're going into a different region altogether. The second thing on the soils, I mean, where Burgundy is really all about the limestone soils. For Jura, it's really this clay-rich marl soils, which come in various different shades of color. And as Guillaume said, one of his plots is all the colors of the rainbow, which I thought was quite nice. So these are really sort of marl soils from the Triassic and early Jurassic geological epochs. As a region, even though it does date back, as I said, to the Middle Ages, it's the plantings of grapevines have shrunk dramatically since the beginning of the 19th century, and it's only now that we are seeing a bit of a renaissance. And there are these big names, some of whom were the founding viticultural sources for Domaine du Pélican, but they are not really known outside the region. So people like Jacques Bouffnet, for example, who is a bit of a legend to Jura anoraks. Those were one of the sources of Domaine du Pélican. So you're really looking at some very long-standing, very serious vineyards here. Let me just go through, by way of a little bit of background, the five main grape varieties that exist in the region. Savagnin is the one that should be mentioned first of all. It is 40% of the Domaine du Pélican estate, and Guillaume d'Angeville describes it as the great Jura grape. So I think if you really want to get a feel for what Jura is all about, it's this white grape variety called Savagnin, which is the only permitted grape variety for Vin Jaune. So I think that's the most distinctive, the most unique to the region. The other white wine variety is then Chardonnay. Both Chardonnay and Pinot Noir have been planted in Jura back, again, all the way to the Middle Ages. So these are not imported Burgundian imposters. They are varieties that have been in Jura for a long, long time. And then there are two other indigenous red varieties to mention. One is Trousseau, which is especially planted in Arbois. The Arbois appellation is where Domaine du Pélican is located. That especially thrives in warmer vineyard sites. And then Poulsard, Poulsard, which tends to make either light reds or deeply coloured rosés. Now there are no rosés at Domaine du Pélican, but they do make a really good lighter coloured red from the Poulsard grape. Then, without getting too technical on it, the really distinctive thing about Jura is these styles which are made oxidatively. So in the same way that lovers of Fino sherry will be used to this terminology of maturing wine under a veil of flor, FLOR in Spain, in the equivalent in Jura is sous voile, which literally means under a veil of film yeast. So the way this works is that rather than topping up a barrel of maturing wine, you will let it become ullaged. So you will let a slight gap of air exist in the top of the barrel. And on this maturing wine, you will get the formation under certain conditions, which their cellar aims to encourage. You will get the formation of a veil or a thin layer of yeast. And it's this yeast which partially protects the wine from the ravages of oxidation, but also partially allows a little bit of oxidative influence into the wines. So the yeast is far thinner than it will be in Jerez, for example. So you won't get a total protection from oxygen, but you get this partial effect of some oxidation and some biological aging, which is a process of the flavors which are derived from the yeast. And so the two wines which really come about as part of this process are the last two white wines in our offer that you'll see once it materializes, and they are the Savagnin sous voile, which is the 2019 vintage, which is sort of part way to Vin Jaune. It's not all the way. It's sort of Vin Jaune for beginners, if you like. And then there is, as Will described, the 2016 inaugural vintage of the Vin Jaune from the Domaine. And this is, it really smells just like Fino sherry, and it has this intensely yeasty, salty palate. It's like nothing you will have tasted outside of Fino, and I can't recommend it highly enough. So really stylistically, there's something for everybody in this offer, from these very quirky, unique wines, all the way to Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, which is as we would recognize it in other regions.
Yeah, I mean, I think if I might add a couple of bits, when we tasted through the Sauvignon and the Chardonnay, which both come in single vineyard as well as a blended sort of scenario, the differences between the single vineyards stand out in a very similar way, which is always quite an encouraging sign. I'm sort of thinking to one of my sort of desert island producers in Conterno, and it's the same thing there. You notice the difference between Barbera and Nebbiolo, almost the same between Chiretta and Cascina Francia as you do here. Between having the Grand Charolais and the Embarby. So you do notice those differences in the same way, which I think is fascinating. And I hadn't realised, fun enough, as much as you were saying, Guy, about the fact that the region's sort of starting to expand again now, but had contracted massively. And that, again, the first thing I thought of with that was something like the Gattinara wines of Conterno, where, in the early sort of 1910 to 1925, there were absolutely, I mean, you couldn't move for there being vines planted absolutely everywhere. And then there was a massive contraction as well because they just weren't drinking as much of the wine locally. And I think this is one of the exciting things about Jura is that the wines are only really maybe in the last 10 to 15 years, and James will have a better idea from the sort of restaurant scene, they're only really appearing internationally in that sort of timescale. I think they've been hidden away and well known about in their own region. But I mean, James, what were some of the observations on sort of food and wine pairings as well?
It's always difficult doing that before lunch when we were tasting, so I had to be slightly restrained. But I agree. I think there's a lot of sommeliers, a lot of wine bars, restaurants looking to take classical elements, but with a twist. And I think that's what the Jura offers. With, I'm a huge Chardonnay fan, so trying the Chardonnays for me was a real sort of benchmark. And I think if you look at other parts of France where Chardonnay is a signature grape, and looking at where pricing's gone, actually the value to be had from the Jura, particularly in relation to the quality, is stunning. And I guess the other reason for mentioning Chardonnay as well, which we should probably touch on, is how the project came about in the first place, where Guillaume was at Taïwan restaurant in Paris, and sommelier came over to the table and, as you would expect, asked, "What would you like to drink?" And I believe the response was something on the lines of, "Well, I'd love a white wine, not a Chardonnay, certainly not something from Burgundy, and certainly not something from the Côte d'Or." So the sommelier duly heads off, comes back with a glass of wine, leaves it on the table for Guillaume to try. Guillaume tries the wine, slightly perplexed, calls the sommelier back. I think there might have been a bit of misunderstanding here. I asked for something that wasn't Chardonnay from Burgundy, to which the sommelier, I think proudly, probably replied at the time, "Well, you're right, it is Chardonnay, but it's from the Jura, from a producer called Stéphane Tissot." And I think Guillaume was so taken with the wine that he had tried that inspired a passion to learn more about the region, and the rest, they say, is history. So I think it's a wonderful story of how it came about. Some might say by accident, others might say by fate. So for me, it was particularly interesting trying the Chardonnays, given that that's what inspired the project from the outset.
And while we're telling stories, we should maybe tell the story of the Pelican and where the name of the estate comes from. So, according to legend, or to recent legend, it was it commemorates a bird belonging to Marie de Bourgogne in the 15th century that she took on a trip to the Jura, and it very sadly didn't survive. And so, fearful of what might happen to their reputation and their sort of standing with Burgundian aristocracy, the people of Arbois named the pelican as the sort of symbol of the town, and this apparently sort of got them out of a sticky situation with the nearby nobility. This was a sort of widely known legend, I think, in the region, but nobody had actually sort of used it for any purposes until Guillaume came along in 2012 and thought, well, this is a perfect name for my domain. So that's where the name comes from, and I think it works rather well.
I also understand it's the name of a local band that plays at the annual sort of festival. So something I must look up on next time I go on Spotify.
Yes, or possibly YouTube. Yeah, I think it's interesting, isn't it? And also the fact that the Pouffinet estate, because he has a little bit of stock of some of his older Vins Jaunes, still exists, was interesting as well, I think. But yeah, it's an exciting thing. I mean, I think we've touched a little bit on the Sauvignon and the Chardonnays, but I think the Pinot and then the Trois Cépages, which I think is a really interesting part of the project, which is, as the name suggests, a blend of the three red grape varieties. So you've got the Trousseau, you've got the Poussard, and you've got the Pinot Noir, which is the dominant grape because it's planted that way. But all of the wines have an elegance, as you would expect from Pinot. A little bit of tannin, not masses of colour, because again it's a thin-skinned grape. But I can't wait actually to serve them to people blind, not to try and catch people out, but just to find out what people actually think of them, because they are incredibly flexible, very Moorish. In that they really make you just want to drink more of them, which is, after all, one of the one of the key aims of wine, I would hope. But yeah, it was fascinating to do both, and we mustn't miss out on the sparkling, which, as I said to Guillaume, I think I'd tried the first vintage, which was 2018, and Savagnin as a zero dosage, so no little bit of sugar added at the very end. Um, the idea of a quite acidic grape variety being zero, and the first time I had it, I was a little bit like, oh. But I have to say, I think that the 19 and then the 20, which is what we're going to start with, which I had the 19 about 6 months ago, and the 20 obviously at this tasting. Absolutely fascinating wine. And I mean, if you wanted something, sparkling as an aperitif or to have with some hard cheese and things, I think this was one of the charms, was that I could almost imagine having almost, with the possible exception of Vangone, which is quite specific, but the others, any of the other wines you could have had with almost any dish in many ways, and you would certainly have enjoyed them all with the local sort of chicken with Vangone and morels, which I'd take a long time to get bored of, I have to say. But yeah.
Talking of pairings, well, I didn't really answer your question, did I, previously? I think for me, particularly for this vintage, there is an amazing freshness and purity running through the wines. In particular, on the whites, my thoughts were going to a lot of seafood dishes, particularly oysters and crabs, where you've got that salinity running through those particular foods, but also a really good salinity to the wines as well. And the reds, particularly the Pinot Noir, again had good acidity, but a very nice, light, delicate touch. So I was thinking more in terms of perhaps game, venison, a particularly good example, or very delicate cuts of red meat where you don't want the flavours of the wine to overpower the delicate flavours of the meat, but you need a little bit of acidity to cut through some of the natural fats that you will get as well. And I think some white cheeses as well, as you mentioned, Will, some of these wines would be absolutely spot on. But their versatility is absolutely key here, and would pair with most dishes, or very simply on their own. And actually, two standouts for me were the Arbois Chardonnay and the Arbois Sauvignon, the Huillet, which has a very good name from Guillaume was explaining to us that when you took the stopper out the top of the barrel and poked your eye over to look down into the barrel itself, in terms of reference of the l'œil on the eye looking into the barrel, but that for me was an absolute standout. And as I said, I think the value here comparative to other regions around the world is a bit of a gem at the moment. So I think we all need to get in quick before it becomes too widely known. It's a good, very well kept secret at the moment.
Guy, from a more technical point of view, what's your sort of thoughts on the aging of the wines? As in, how do you feel they're going to age? And slightly to answer my own question, I got the sort of feeling that, particularly with the ones that have seen some oxidation, one of the great charms of those is that they're so complex already, and that actually, because they're oxidized in the way they should be, that they probably offer a hell of a lot of complexity sort of straight off the bat. But what's your sort of feeling across the piece?
Yeah, well, Guillaume was very interesting on this because we did sort of sound him out on possible evolution especially for the oxidative styles, and for the Savagnin sous voile, so not the Vangone but the other one. He said, well, this won't evolve in bottle sort of enormously. So it's really a sense of, it's had its oxidative period of aging already, and it's a 2019 vintage, so okay, releasing that in 2024, it's already a 5-year-old wine. But I think really there's a sense that what you see is what you get, and I mean it's kind of a wine that will probably change but won't necessarily improve in bottle. So I think the great joy, I think, to buy a wine which is 5 years old and be able to drink it immediately. I think this is not something that, selling Bordeaux and Burgundy and sort of northern Italian wines, our customers will be used to having to cellar wines for rather a long time. But actually, to be able to buy something and get stuck into it straight away, I think very refreshing. So I think I would say that for both of the oxidative styles, that you can drink them almost immediately. I mean, the requirements for Vin Jaune is 6.5 years in barrel, but I mean, it's done that. So, it's had that period of aging. So in a sense, this is being offered ready to drink to the market, which is great. For the other wines, I think, relatively speaking, it's sort of the benchmark that you would use for Burgundy. I mean, Guillaume endearingly is very keen that we don't compare these wines to, especially on the Pinot Noir front, to Burgundy. And he said his Pinot, he said, you must not compare this to Volnay. And so I've purposely steered very clear of making any comparisons to Volnay and the tasting notes. But I think in terms of aging profile, Chardonnay and Pinot Noir will age, over a decade and more, I would say. Probably slightly less for the Chardonnay, slightly more for the Pinot. And just picking up on what we were saying before, it was probably the tasting where we had more food comments than I can remember, actually. And, there was a lot of sort of suggestions of, oh, you could pair with this, you could pair with that. And just picking up on what was being said recently. The Vin Jaune, apparently, the classic pairing with Vin Jaune is a piece of Comté cheese. So I think I can totally understand how that would work very well. There is another wine that we haven't mentioned yet, but that's the Arbois Savagnin Macération Pelliculaire. So that's a skin contact, dry white wine made from the Savagnin grape. And I mean, it's great. It's, for me, the wine where you can most see the resemblance of the Savagnin grape to, it is DNA-wise related to Traminer and Gewürztraminer, and you can see that sort of aromatic prettiness which you get with Gewürz in this incarnation of the Savagnin with a bit of skin contact. And for that, I mean, pairing with a curry or a rich sauce or something, I think would be fantastic. It's got more than enough weight to stand up to that. And then one comment, which I liked so much, I did actually end up putting in the offer, was on the Arbois Savagnin Houillet. Guillaume simply said afterwards, every time I taste this, I want 6 oysters. So I thought that was quite a nice way of encapsulating the character of that particular wine.
Yeah, and I think actually, fun enough, I just noticed as I'm sort of looking at your notes now, another area we should mention is that 22, 22 being the vintage of, let's say, 8 or 9 of the 13 wines in the offer, was incredibly warm across most of Europe. But yeah, actually, when you look at the alcohol levels on almost all the wines, you're in the sort of 12 to 13.5, with the one or two exceptions, but you're in the sort of 12 to 13.5% bracket. So there's that angle too. I mean, we will endlessly say, wine isn't defined by its alcohol, and that there are, you can have balanced wine at 16 and you can have out of balance wine at 12. And that is absolutely true. But it is just quite an interesting sort of pattern, really.
Yeah, I think for people who are conscious of how much alcohol they're consuming, these are brilliant wines, because they do come in very much at the lower end of the scale. So yeah, I would agree. Shall we say a few words about biodynamics? Because I think that's something which is central to Marquis d'Angevin and Volnay, and also has always been central to Domaine du Pélican since the beginning. I was lucky enough not to be starting with a totally blank sheet of paper when I was writing the offer for this launch, because obviously our colleague Thibaut Mathieu in Hong Kong has been working with the wines for a few years. And one of the things that Thibaut, I noticed, had picked up on in one of his previous offers was the link between biodynamics and resistance to drought. Now, increasingly in these summers like 2022, where you do have a lot of heat and you have droughts impacting the ability of wines to mature fruit, and hydric stress and shutdown. The fact that biodynamics encourages these really deep root systems and enables vines to source water from really deep down in the water table, this is a big benefit to those who are working biodynamically. And I think you can say, well, certain vineyards are more set up for it in the sense that many of the holdings are close together, as is the case here. So, that makes it easier to work biodynamically. And obviously having access to a team who's done it all before in Volnay and sharing some of that know-how via Francois Duvivier and people, obviously that's a great advantage that they have as well. But I think it's a real string to their bow that they're able to be biodynamic.
And just on that, Guy, I believe I'm right in saying that the team is there full time, a team of 8, so in situ. And I guess what you were saying links into my opening gambit around there's no substitution in my mind for actually seeing a vineyard firsthand, because the energy you get from it, the visual observations, you really get an idea about how happy that vineyard is. And I think that is so important with the resulting wines and the atmosphere there, the energy there. And we've spoken about the birds, but I think these things are really, really, really important and shouldn't be underestimated.
Yeah.
Well, I think we can all agree that we are super excited about starting this new relationship, and it's not a new relationship in the grand scheme of things because we've known each other for a long time. But it's a new departure for us in the UK, and we are so excited about it. Unless there's anything else that either of you guys want to add.
I think I can already sense the sales team slightly fighting over some of the wines, so which is always a good sign.
Exactly.
And I think they'll be firm favourites amongst the team, which is always a good sign. So no, I think it's a bit of a gem, and you're very well written off, Guy. I think gives a great insight into it, and hopefully this has been a little bit helpful as well. So if people have got more questions, please just just be in touch.
I'm not sure if Guillaume was tantalising us, but where we were tasting in the cellar, we could actually see the pallet with the Corny and Barrow wines on it, labelled to our warehouse, sitting there. In fact, I think Guy and I were writing our notes on top of it, so it was sort of priming us for the excitement of the wines about to arrive. So, which is very, very imminent, and the offer out the 25th, 26th of June. So not too long to wait now. But I, for one, as soon as the wines arrive, will be buying them to get onto my wine rack and ultimately my wine glass at home. Super excited.
Yeah, and we'll have Guillaume over with us on the 25th of June as well, doing a dinner with private customers and doing a masterclass with some sommeliers as well, which is very, very exciting.
Brilliant. Well done, chaps.
Good stuff.
Thank you. Okay, well, signing off. Good to chat, and here's to Jura.
Indeed, here's to Jura. Well done.